language. He's a race baiter, isn't he?
I just think I've had my issues with Nigel Farage. In previous elections, you can find footage of me taking Nigel Farage on about that poster that he did that time, you know, trying to steer up with the row of people behind.
People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement to hatred against me, I've had to have a very significant change in my security situation over the course of the weekend.
Angela Rayner has found herself in the spotlight once again, and not for the right reasons. Her latest outburst, dismissing Nigel Farage's concerns as fake news, has ignited a firestorm within Labour and beyond. But as the grim facts surrounding the Southport tragedy continue to emerge, it seems Rayner's attempt to brush off legitimate questions has only left her credibility in shambles. Was this the meltdown that finally exposed the cracks in Labour's facade? And more importantly, does this chaos reveal a deeper problem within Labour's approach to national security? Stay with us as we break it all down. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to stay updated, and ring the bell to get notified when we release more critical insights.
Well, it's pretty horrendous. A third young girl has died as a result of the stabbings yesterday in Southport. I obviously join everybody in my horror at what has happened. I know the Prime Minister went to lay flowers and was heckled, and it shows you how unhappy the public are with the state of law and order in our country. I have to say there are one or two questions. Was this guy being monitored by the security services? Some reports say he was, others less sure. The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from us. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it is a fair and legitimate question. What I do know is something is going horribly wrong in our once beautiful country.
Rayner is now facing widespread criticism after accusing Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform UK party, of spreading fake news regarding the tragic Southport attacks. Farage's simple yet vital question, whether the attacker, Axel Rudakubana, was being monitored by security services, was dismissed by Rayner as inflammatory nonsense. But it turns out Farage's instincts were spot on. The attacker had not only been referred to the government's Prevent anti-extremism programme 3 times, but also had an Al-Qaeda training manual and dangerous substances like ricin in his possession. How could such damning evidence be so conveniently ignored by someone holding high office?
Well, I suspect that it was advice from the CPS. The effect was disastrous, so I've got no doubt about this, that more information should have been put into the public domain. And I think there was a very, very poor 8 hours after the immediate attack where social media went completely mad. And it was really up to the authorities, I think, to give a calm, sober, honest and authoritative account of what they could say. The contempt of court rules, they are difficult. And I know that journalists find them hard, but frankly, this man was only ever going to be convicted of murder or manslaughter. And it really is hard to see why more information couldn't have been given to the public. They were crying out for it. I mean, I was desperate to know. When I was on holiday, I heard about the terrible attack. Of course, I wanted to know who was doing it. And there was a long period where nothing was said. So I think that how the CPS, how the police, how the authorities approach giving information when these terrible attacks occurs has to be thought about in the new social media age. Just saying nothing is no longer an option.
Rayner's attempts to paint Farage as a divisive fearmonger have spectacularly backfired. Far from leaning into fake news, Farage raised concerns echoed by experts like Jonathan Hall KC, the UK's independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, who confirmed that the truth could have been shared with the public without harming the trial. Instead, Rayner's dismissiveness has only fanned the flames of distrust. And now, Farage is demanding an apology from Rayner for her baseless accusation.
We've learned from these events that when somebody is arrested and there was a potential issue like this arising, the police probably need to tell the media who has been arrested, and what their background is. Well, I've got to tell you, folks, that is exactly what I was saying. Tell us the truth, because you would not have had that frenzied online speculation. Why the government, why the police chose not to do it is something we need answers to. Perfectly clear from the views of those two gentlemen that actually it was government that led to those riots being far worse than they could have been. Now, there was some pretty appalling, abusive stuff said about me online, so I'd like apologies, please, from Anna.
Farage's demand for an apology highlights the growing frustration with Labour's handling of the Southport tragedy. The party's reluctance to acknowledge their role in misleading the public only intensifies the need for accountability. Rayner's initial deflection, claiming Farage was simply spreading fake news, not only ignored serious concerns, but also insulted the intelligence of the public, who deserve transparency. As Farage pushes for an apology, many are asking if Labour is truly capable of taking responsibility for their mistakes. Can a political party that refuses to own up to its errors really be trusted to lead the country? The calls for an apology are now echoing from many corners, demanding that Rayner and the Labour Party stop deflecting and confront the truth about their handling of this serious issue.
And why did the Deputy Prime Minister on July the 31st dismiss as, and I quote, fake news, those saying there may be further facts to come out? Let me just briefly, Mr. Speaker, before concluding, explain why this is important. As Jonathan Hall said, if there is a void, then misinformation, especially online, can fill that void. And this appears to be what happened here. And some of that information, it is said, originated overseas from hostile states. It is possible, indeed it is even likely, that this misinformation that was put into the void fueled the totally unacceptable riots we then subsequently saw. So, will the Home Secretary accept, given what I've just said and what Jonathan Hall said, does she accept there should and could have been more openness and transparency, as I just set out, without prejudicing the trial, and that disclosing more of that truth openly and transparently would have helped combat the damaging misinformation that circulated and which arguably fueled the riots?
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp didn't mince his words when talking about the riots. He pointed directly at Rayner, criticising her for dismissing legitimate concerns as fake news, which has only deepened public mistrust. Her stance raises serious questions about Labour's priorities. Are they more concerned with protecting narratives than ensuring public safety? The government's decision to withhold critical information about Ruda Cubana's links to terrorism at the time of the attack sparked nationwide riots, leading to over 1,200 arrests.
I also think the public inquiry should look at the government response after the terrible atrocities. It's been suggested that there's information the government knew about, which it didn't release, potentially under CPS advice, but we need to look at what they knew and when, whether they should have been more open and transparent. Jonathan Hall, the current reviewer of terrorism legislation, said last October that the government should always be open and transparent, that they should say as much as possible, because otherwise there is a void which misinformation can fill. Jonathan Hall, who's a legal expert, he's a KC, said that there's a lot the government can say to the public in those circumstances. And of course, we had those terrible riots, for which there was absolutely no excuse. But I think the review should look into, the inquiry should look into whether the government's failure to be more open with the public contributed to the misinformation environment. So I think the review needs to look at the inquiry needs to look at what happened before those atrocities and also what happened afterwards.
Well, yes,
Chris Philp is also calling for an inquiry into what the government knew and why it wasn't disclosed. The public deserves answers and apologies from those who sought to stifle the truth. Rayner's meltdown over this issue isn't just a personal blunder. It's a symptom of a deeper problem within Labour's leadership. Her unwillingness to confront inconvenient truths only fuels public resentment and distrust. Angela Rayner's refusal to acknowledge her blunders reveals a troubling pattern of behaviour within the Labour Party. Her handling of the Southport tragedy exemplifies how Labour is more focused on political messaging than addressing real-world issues. Instead of owning up to her mistakes, Rayner opted for the easy route of deflecting criticism, dismissing valid concerns as fake news without offering any solid answers. This attitude not only alienates the public, but undermines the trust that is crucial for any party hoping to lead the country.
After the fact, it's widely accepted that more should have been vouchsafed to the public, as it were. But before these murders took place, there was ample evidence that this young man was a very, very dangerous threat, a very dangerous threat. And yet, when we look at the evidence now, there just seems to have been a collective flapping of the hands, a sense that somehow he fell between this stool and that category and that criteria, and nothing was done to protect those girls.
Well, I think that's exactly what the inquiry needs to get to the bottom of. I think he'd come to the attention of the police. He was being supervised by social services, by the local council. Obviously, he had a lot of very serious difficulties at school. I think he'd been expelled from one school, had threatened pupils at that school subsequently. And, as you say, 3 referrals to prevent, 1 in 2019 and 2 in 2021. So all of those interactions, I think, need to be looked at. Should more have been done? What information did those agencies have available to them? Should they have made different decisions based on the information they had at the time? Are there additional mechanisms that need to be created? Those are all the questions this inquiry needs to get to the bottom of.
Don't you think that...
What's even more concerning is Rayner's failure to meet public expectations on matters of national security. In a time when the country needs transparency and accountability, Rayner's attempt to sweep serious concerns under the rug has left many questioning her ability to handle such critical issues. By ignoring the questions raised by Farage and others, she's not just putting herself in a precarious position, but also Labour as a whole. How can the public trust a leader who's more interested in playing politics than protecting citizens? Rayner's lack of self-awareness in the face of growing criticism speaks volumes about her leadership style. Instead of engaging with the uncomfortable truths about the security risks posed by the Southport attacker, she chose to deflect and attack the messenger. This inability to listen and reflect on her mistakes paints a picture of someone who is unfit for the serious responsibilities of a national leader. It's clear that Rayner's approach is more about scoring political points than ensuring public safety or holding the government to account.
That tweet, but look, we shouldn't have racism in our politics. My understanding is that Nigel had, distanced himself from the comments that people have made in his campaign. But it's about leadership and what leaders do.
Not just Rayner, the controversy surrounding Sir Keir Starmer's handling of the Southport tragedy also deepens the distrust in Labour's leadership. His admission that he knew about the attackers' terror links immediately after the killings only adds to the sense of a cover-up. Rayner, in turn, has avoided addressing these critical questions, leaving the public to wonder why such essential information was withheld. The lack of transparency from Labour's top figures, including Starmer's insistence that revealing the information would have jeopardised the trial, only serves to fuel suspicions about their priorities.
Yes, I knew the details as they were emerging. That is the usual practice in a case such as this. But you know and I know that it would not have been right to disclose those details. The only losers, if the details had been disclosed, would be the victims and the families, because it ran the risk the trial would collapse.
Sir Keir's own actions in this case are worth scrutinising. While he defends his position by citing legal constraints, it's difficult to ignore the optics of a leader seemingly complicit in a cover-up. The criticism from figures like Nigel Farage and Jonathan Hall highlights the broader implications of Labour's silence on this issue. Rayner's repeated dismissals and Starmer's failure to be forthcoming have left both leaders exposed to charges of putting party politics above national security.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's denial in August that Rudy Cabana was being investigated for offences under the Terrorism Act didn't protect the trial, because we found out these facts anyway when Rudy Cabana was charged in October. And the same disclosure didn't cause other trials, such as that of the Parsons Green tube bomber, to fail before. I'm not talking about the details of prevent referrals, which the Home Secretary has used in answers to similar questions, but of the information that was disclosed in October. If a jury knew that before the trial, why couldn't the Prime Minister have told the country the truth in August?
The failure to disclose key details about Axel Rudakubana's background shows a glaring disconnect between the government's need for transparency and Labour's reluctance to provide it. The public was denied crucial information, even as it became clear that Rudakubana had a history of extremist ties. Rayner's role in downplaying this matter by dismissing legitimate questions further complicates Labour's position. The public deserves answers and apologies from those who sought to stifle the truth. Ultimately, the public deserves more than vague reassurances and platitudes about transparency. The fact that Labour failed to act on clear warning signs of the threat posed by Rudakubana raises serious questions about the party's readiness to lead the country in matters of national security. Rayner's dismissal of Nigel Farage's concerns as fake news only compounded the situation, further undermining public trust. Her handling of this crisis has not only reinforced the perception that Labour is unfit to manage national security, but has also played into the hands of those who believe the party is out of touch with the public's real concerns. The longer they delay taking responsibility for their failures, the deeper the hole they dig for themselves politically. Your perspective matters. Can Rayner really expect to lead when she refuses to face the hard truths about her failures? What does it say about a party that dismisses concerns about public safety as fake news? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on similar stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in these discussions. See you next time.